Good afternoon, I'm Amanda Pfeffer, and this is Ontario Today. In this hour, the crisis of attention.
If you're struggling to focus and pay attention, or if your kids are, this isn't your fault. This is happening to almost all of us. Your attention didn't collapse. Your attention has been stolen from you by these big forces.
New York Times best-selling author Johann Hari is our guest this hour. His latest book is called Stolen Focus. It's about why we're having trouble paying attention. Our question, what do you lose when you lose your focus? 1-888-817-8995.
So one of the reasons we've got such a serious attention crisis is we've got the combination of technology that is designed to hack and invade our attention, combined with all these factors that are in different ways undermining our ability to pay attention.
Speaking to dozens of world experts, Hari weaves together some of the evidence that suggests we are collectively facing an existential threat. Our technology, together with factors like chronic sleep deprivation, the gig work economy, stress, and pollution are conspiring to rob us of our attention. Not just our inability to focus in the moment, but affecting even our long-term ability to make lifelong goals.
I think there's something very profound and maybe irreversible happening to human attention in the digital age. I think it's more than just distraction, and it's more than even just addiction. It could actually be the defining political and moral challenge of our time.
Hari looks at the work of James Williams, a former Google employee, who says we have three kinds of attention. Spotlight, the stuff we're focused on right now. My voice, if you're listening to the radio. Starlight, which is the broader focus on our goals. Then there's daylight, the ability to have the mental space to make those goals in the first place. Your goal to build a business or a meaningful relationship or spend quality time with your own teenagers.
If you look at the goals that technologies have for us, they're not usually these things. They're things like maximize the amount of time we spend with them, time on site, or the number of clicks, the number of times we can scroll or tap, the number of page views or ad views, things like this.
I just need to know what's going on, and I just feel like I need to answer before I'm out of the loop kind of thing. So I just get up in my room and I'm like, I'm just going to check my phone quick before bed, and then I get scrolling and time keeps ticking.
Did you know that 80% of children check their phones every 5 minutes?
We've often looked at this as a personal problem, that we're just not disciplined enough, or we have to just crack down on the kids. But our guest, Johann Hari, says this is much bigger than you and me. And once we understand that, we can work on the right solutions. This hour, we also want to hear from you. How is your own problem of losing attention taking control of your life? What concerns do you have about your own children? What's happening to their attention? And what are the consequences? Have you had any success wrenching your attention back? Or are you finding more and more you are losing your way? Your starlight is dimming. You can't find the daylight to manage and control your own life. Our question this hour, what do you lose when you lose your focus? 1-888-817-8995. Our Twitter handle is at CBC Ontario Today. And again, our question to you, what is lost when you lose your focus? 1-888-817-8995. Our Twitter handle is at CBC Ontario Today. And our guest this hour is Johann Hari. He is a New York Times best-selling author. His latest book is called Stolen Focus, Why You Can't Pay Attention and How to Think Deeply Again. He is joining us from the United Kingdom. Thank you so much for joining us and holding our hand this hour.
Oh, Amanda, what a great intro. And I spent a lot of time in Toronto and Ontario when I was researching the book, so I'm so thrilled to be with you. Thanks so much.
Well, one of the people who's going to join us at about just after the half hour is Dr. Nathan Spring at McGill, and he makes an appearance in your book as we talk about mind wandering. But you start your book in a really interesting place. I think a lot of people can identify with it. You were very sad about what had happened to your godson as a teenager. He'd completely transformed. He disappeared into his phone. His life revolved around that connection to his phone. His ego wrapped up completely in that feedback loop. And so you had this plan. At 9 years old, this was a kid who wanted to go see Graceland, the home of his hero, Elvis. You decided to make that happen, took him to Memphis. Tell us what happened.
Oh, God, this is quite a painful story to tell. I'd promised him when he was 9 that I would take him, and by the time he was 19, he was just spending literally every minute on his phone. And I to be honest, I wasn't so much better. I was better than him, but not so much. And so I decided we would break this numbing routine and we would go to Graceland. But I made him promise that if we went, he would leave his phone in the hotel when we went. So we went. When you arrive at the gates of Graceland now, there's no person to show you around. This is even before COVID. What happens is they hand you an iPad and you put in earbuds, and the iPad shows you around. It says, go left, go right. It describes the room you're in. And in every room you go to, there's a picture of that room on the iPad in front of you. So what happens is that everyone just kind of walks around Graceland staring at their iPad. And I'm kind of getting a bit annoyed as we walk around because really people are not looking up around them. And we got to the jungle room, which was Elvis's favorite room in Graceland. And there was a Canadian couple, no disrespect, next to us. I'll never forget this. The man turned to his wife and he said, "Honey, this is amazing. Look, if you swipe left, you can see the jungle room to the left. And if you swipe right, you can see the jungle room to the right." And I laughed because I thought he was kidding. And I turned and looked, and him and his wife were just swiping back and forth. And I leaned over and I said, "But hey, sir, there's an old-fashioned form of swiping you could do. It's called turning your head, because look, we're actually in the jungle room. You don't have to look at it on your screen. We're there." And they looked at me like I was completely insane, possibly correctly, and backed out the room. And I turned to my godson to laugh about it. And he was standing in the corner staring at Snapchat, because from the minute we had landed, he just couldn't stop. And I went up to him and I did that thing that's never a good idea with a teenager. I tried to snatch the phone out of his hand and I said, "I know you're afraid of missing out, but this is guaranteeing that you'll miss out. You're not present at the events of your own life. You're not seeing the things that are right in front of you." And he stormed off, and I wandered around Memphis on my own that day, and I found him that night in the Heartbreak Hotel where we were staying up the street. And he was sitting by the swimming pool staring at his phone, and I went up to him and I apologized for getting so angry. And he didn't look up, but he said, "I know something's really wrong and I don't know what it is." And that's when I thought, okay, I need to begin to investigate this subject.
I love that hotel is called the Heartbreak Hotel. Also, can we define attention for our audience? What does it mean?
So there's a few definitions, but generally your ability to pay attention is defined as your ability to narrow down and selectively attend to something in your environment. So think about that. I'm talking to you now, right? But I'm sitting in my office. Out of the window, I can see people walking by. I can see cars. If I tilt my head slightly to the left, I can see all of my books. I can hear the air conditioning. You probably can't hear it, but I can hear the whir of the air conditioning. Somewhere in this room, there's my phone. It's probably flashing at me. I'm filtering all of that out, and I'm just thinking, okay, what did Amanda just ask me? She asked me, how do you define attention? And this ability to filter out the noise, the distractions, and just focus on one thing has been really significantly declining in recent years. Our ability to do this. The average office worker now focuses on any one task for only 3 minutes. For every one child who was identified with serious attention problems when I was 7 years old, there's now 100 children identified with this problem. And I wanted to understand, okay, why is this happening to us? What's going on here? So I used my training in the social sciences at Cambridge University to go on a big journey all over the world, from Moscow to Montreal to Melbourne to Miami, not just to cities that begin with the letter M. I don't know why I'm so alliterative there. And I interviewed over 200 of the leading experts in the world on attention and focus. And I learned from them, like you set up in the intro so brilliantly, that there's scientific evidence for 12 factors that can make your attention better or make your attention worse. And loads of the factors that have been making our attention worse have been hugely rising in recent years. This is why I concluded your attention didn't collapse. This isn't a failing on your part. Your attention has been stolen by some really big forces. But once we understand those forces, we can begin to get our and our children's attention back again.
Why don't we pick off the first one, and the one that, you know, we has been the focus of a lot of attention on this problem of attention, which is technology. You talked to Tristan Harris. He's a president and co-founder of the Center for Humane Technology. He testified on January 8th to 220. We have a little bit of sound from that. He testified at a congressional hearing called "Americans at Risk: Manipulation and Deception in the Digital Age." He was a former employee at Google. In his early career, he worked as a design ethicist at Google before he left there. Have a listen to his discussion about the harm to children.
When this becomes the infrastructure, it controls all of our lives. So we wake up with these devices, we check our phones 150 times a day. It's the infrastructure for going to bed. Children spend as much time on these devices as they do at the hours of school. So no matter what you're putting in people's brains, kids' brains at school, you've got all the hours they spend in their phones. And let's take the kids issue. So as infrastructure, this is not, the business model of this infrastructure is not aligned with the fabric of society. How much have you paid for your Facebook account recently? Or your YouTube account? 0. How are they worth more than $1 trillion in market value? They monetize our attention. The way they get that attention is by influencing you and using these dark patterns or tricks to do it. So the way they do it with children is they say, how many likes or followers do you have? So they basically get children addicted to getting attention from other people. They use filters, likes, et cetera, beautification filters that enhance your self-image. And after 2 decades in decline, the mental health of teen girls, high depressive symptoms, there's an image here that they'll be able to show, went up 170% after the year 2010 with the rise of Instagram, et cetera. Okay? These are your children. These are your constituents. This is a real issue. And it's because we're hacking the self-image of children.
That's Tristan Harris. I want to go to our first caller, who is Flora, who's in Ottawa. Do you want to talk about this? And again, our question to our audience, what do you lose when you lose focus? And our number is 1-888-817-8995. Go ahead, Flora.
Hi, yeah, I'm a mom here in Ottawa. And when I heard the subject of this show, I immediately ran to the phone because I have been concerned for my kids and for kids in general. I remember being a kid and having a hard time turning off the television, and that was a time when, you couldn't choose your shows when they played. You couldn't choose how long you watched. I mean, you could choose that you would finish, but, nowadays kids can choose their shows whenever they want to watch them and watch them over and over. And they just have so many options, social media, YouTube. So I feel like, I've noticed this in my kids and in my social circles that kids can't turn away from screens, and it causes conflict, and I'm concerned that they're young, they're 7 and 9, but I am afraid for how it's going to turn out when they're teens and adults.
Yeah, one of the things that I keep hearing also is enormous guilt and stress for parents about what happens when they are trying to wrestle with this issue and their relationship with their children. What's your fear about what's happening to that?
Yeah, and that's another thing. I've been trying to parent my kids with a connection in mind, trying to ensure that we have a strong relationship and that they value the present moment and being in the present moment. And the problem that I've noticed with screens is that it completely takes them away from that. And then when I try to limit it for them, it creates strong emotion immediately, and I feel like that severs the connection for some reason. They don't understand at this age that I'm trying to help them and trying to prevent sort of an addictive pattern. And so, yeah, it kind of influences their trust. It influences our relationship. It creates frustration for me, guilt for me, and for them to probably, it's like any parent-child relationship. Your parents trying to limit you in what you want to do, but yeah. It's hard when their social circle, is reinforcing this, and it's accepted, say, in schools and everywhere. So yeah, it's been definitely causing stress for our relationship as well.
It's so interesting, Flora. I'm really moved by what you're saying because so many people are having this fight, and I think what I learned from my book Stolen Focus, interviewing over 200 of the leading experts about this, is there's kind of two levels at which we've got to tackle this, I think. I think of it as defense and offense. So there are dozens of things that we can do to protect ourselves and our children. I'll give you a very simple example. I go through loads in the book, but I'm pointing at it, but this is the radio. You can't see me. Over there, I've got something called a K-safe. It's a plastic safe. You take off the lid, you put in your phone, you put on the lid, and it will lock away your phone for anything between 5 minutes and a whole day. I recommend everyone with kids do an hour a day where you all sit down and you all lock away your phones, because I know a lot of parents tell their kids to lock away their phone while being, sort of distracted by it themselves. So that's one of dozens of things. It's really hard at first, but when the pleasures of focus start to come back, it's really important. And you start to feel so much more competent and connected. But I want to be really honest, because I think I can hear the pain in your voice, and you're absolutely right to be pained about this. And Tristan said, who we were just listening to, who had been at the heart of the machine that designed the stuff that your kids are using, he said, look, you can try having self-control, but every time you try and have self-control, there are 10,000 engineers on the other side of the screen who are really sophisticated at undermining your self-control, which is why we can't. Defense is really important. All the things I argue for in the book that are defense, I'm passionately in favor of, and they'll really help. But we've also got to go on offense, because at the moment, it's like someone is pouring itching powder over you and your kids all day, and then they're leaning forward and going, hey, Flora, you might want to learn how to meditate, then you wouldn't scratch so much. And you want to go, right, I'll learn to meditate, but you need to stop pouring itching powder on me. And that can sound a bit fancy, like, well, what does that even mean? There's a really great example in the history of Canada, a very recent history that you'll probably remember, Flora. I remember it, that I think can help us to think about one of the things we need to do now. So I think you're probably about the same age as me, Flora. I'm in my early 40s. When I was a kid, the standard form of gasoline in Canada and in Britain was leaded gasoline. And a little bit before our time, the standard form of paint was leaded paint. And it was discovered that exposure to lead is really bad for people's brains, and is particularly a disaster for children's ability to focus and pay attention. So what happened is a group of ordinary moms, what we used to call housewives, in Canada banded together, and they said, why are we allowing this? Why are we allowing this industry to screw up our kids' brains? And it's really important to notice what they didn't say. They didn't say, so let's ban all paint, or let's ban all petrol, right? They didn't say that. In the same way that it would be idiocy for us to say, let's get rid of tech, right? What they said is, let's deal with the specific component in the paint and the petrol that is harming our kids' attention, which is lead. And they fought for years, these moms, for their kids. And as everyone listening knows, they succeeded. There's no more leaded gasoline. There's no more leaded paint. It doesn't exist anymore. As a result, the average Canadian child, according to the CDC, is 5 IQ points higher than they would have been. And to me, this is a really important model. What those mothers did is they identified something in the environment, the specific component that was harming their kids' attention, and they got it out of the environment. Now, there are equivalents in our technology. It's not all of our tech, just like it wasn't all of paint and all of petrol, but there are specific elements of our tech at the moment that are designed, as the people who design them admit, are designed to invade your kids' attention, and indeed your attention. We can get rid of those things, right? I talk in the book about how we can do that.
It's interesting. Many of the adults have are burdened with the same issues. I want to go to Rebecca, who's in Guelph, so we can continue this discussion about kids. Hi, Rebecca, go ahead.
Hi, I'm a mom of 2 boys that are now 10 years old, and I was listening to your show, and it definitely perked up my interest because I found this very significant shift in our family's quality of life since pandemic, but it had a lot to do with the shift to technology and more reliance on it. My family, when my children were about 8 when the pandemic started, and we were a family that did use screens and watch TV, and in school the children use their computers, but they didn't have their own computers at home. There was no computer playtime. And since things have changed as a result of the pandemic, there's more of a reliance on, because of the need with all the restrictions, to attend school online and also to socialize online with your friends because you weren't seeing them. You weren't allowed to see them. And then anything was online, like any art class, any music class was all online. And I found this has been very hard on our family, and shifting back is very difficult because now I have children that are accustomed to this. And whereas when before the pandemic, our weekends would be, say, attending a farmer's market or going out to meet up at a playground. The children are in the habit now of playing computer games. I really try to restrict this because I see how it affects my children, and I have since they started school, even at 5 years old.
On the ride all the way to the event. And everywhere else. I'm just wondering, what is your concern about the future for them?
My concern is that as a parent, I feel like I'm swimming upstream. I feel like I have read and have a lot of knowledge about the effects of screens and how children are lured into things like social media, YouTube. And I was able to resist it with my children until the pandemic, and then it was almost impossible. So now my children, especially one who has a diagnosis of ADHD, has a really difficult time signing off when his time is up to play computer games. And this is hard because all his friends play Minecraft, and he wants to, discuss it, and he wants to be a part of the peer group at school that also is involved in this. And he's 10, and he knows children who have their own YouTube channels, and then I'm at my house the only one. He's saying I'm the only one that puts time constraints around his computer use. And I said, yes, I do, and there's good reason why, and we can discuss this. And then also, not permitting certain things, like my children don't have social media, my children don't have YouTube channels like their friends do. Yeah,
fighting upstream. I want to get Tristan to weigh in on this, because you say some very interesting things in your book on this. Stand by, Rebecca. We'll come back to you.
Rebecca, you should be so proud of yourself, and you are really sane. As you were speaking, there's a line that the Indian philosopher Krishnamurti said: "It's no sign of good health to be well adjusted to a sick society," came into my mind. But there's been this big transformation in childhood, right? So two things have happened at the same time. There's been an explosion in children's attention problems, and there's been a profound transformation of childhood. And in the book, I tell the story of a woman called Lenore Skenazy, who's one of my heroes, because she built what I think is a big part of the solution to the problem that you're describing, Rebecca. Lenore grew up in a suburb of Chicago in the 1960s. And from when she was 5 years old, she left home on her own and walked to school, which was 15 minutes away. And she would bump into all the other kids because everyone walked to school on their own. And when school ended at 3 o'clock, they would all leave together, wander around the neighborhood for a few hours and go home when they were hungry. They would play freely with each other. That is what anyone who grew up in the 60s listening, that was your childhood too. That was what human childhood looked like entirely. By the time you got to the 1990s and Lenore had her own kids, that kind of childhood had ended. By 2003, only 10% of children in North America ever played outside. And so Lenore has been a key part of how we deal with that. But I hear the music playing, so I think I'm meant to shut up now.
Yeah, we'll hear what she did about that in the next half hour. Our guest this half hour is Johann Hari. He is, again, the author of a new book called Stolen Focus: Why You Can't Pay Attention and How to Think Deeply Again. And our question to you is all about that. What do you lose when you lose focus? 1-888-817-8995. Our Twitter handle is at CBC Ontario Today. Joining us also in the next half hour, Dr. Nathan Spring from McGill University, who's going to talk to us about the importance of mind wandering and what happens when technology interferes with that. And we'll be right back with more of your calls in the next 90 seconds. Stand by now for local news and weather. You're listening to Ontario Today. I'm Amanda Pfeffer. What are you losing when you lose focus? 1-888-817-8995.
If you're struggling to focus and pay attention, or if your kids are, this isn't your fault. This is happening to almost all of us. Your attention didn't collapse. Your attention has been stolen from you by these big forces.
Our guest is New York Times bestselling author Johann Hari. He literally wrote the book on stolen focus and why we're struggling to pay attention. And he takes aim first at our growing addiction to our technology. And it's not a bug, it's a feature.
It's not an accident. It's a conscious design decision. The biggest tech firms in the world now are figuring out what they can do to continuously juice people.
Ramsey Brown is the founder of Dopamine Labs in California. The company uses artificial intelligence and neuroscience to help tech companies make their apps more engaging and persuasive. In other words, more addictive. He says they're in a technological arms race to keep you there longer. Just how long? CBC's Marketplace did an experiment to find out. It tracked the smartphones and tablets of a family in Guelph for 2 months to see how many hours each family member spent on their device, including 8-year-old Jackson, who has his own tablet.
Wake up, eat breakfast, Samsung, go to school.
And then after school?
Samsung, eat before I go to bed because I'm hungry. Samsung, go to bed, good night.
If Jackson keeps up with that routine for the rest of his life, Marketplace found his projections of lifetime use would add up to a shocking number.
Jackson, you're 15 years.
I haven't even been around that long.
Not entirely surprising for social worker Lisa Pont with the Toronto Centre of Addiction and Mental Health.
If you give them a buffet of candy and say, all right, have at it, they're probably not going to stop themselves.
Lisa says younger people need parental guidance on how much is too much when it comes to screen time.
Because it's too tempting at that age to mitigate their own use. You're not even dealing with a fully developed brain who has the same kind of impulse control or ability to foresee consequences.
Are you a parent worried about the consequences of your kid's loss of attention? Or maybe you're worried about the effect of your attention and distraction on your child. What are you losing when you lose focus? 1-888-817-8995. Our Twitter handle is at CBC Ontario Today. Again, what are you losing when you lose your focus? We've been speaking to Johann Hari. Again, his book is called Stolen Focus, Why You Can't Pay Attention and How to Think Deeply Again. And you were talking about sort of a program that was begun to try and deal with one of the issues dealing with kids. Can you go on?
Yeah, I'm conscious that a lot of people listening, it's such a brilliant show you're doing, and I really appreciate being on it. I'm conscious a lot of people will be feeling overwhelmed, and I really want to explain to them, I went to places that have begun to deal with these problems. This is not inevitable. None of this is inevitable. We can act to change this, and I'm actually quite optimistic. So I'll give you an example of one of many places I went to that have begun to build the solution. So we were talking about kids don't get to go outside anymore, even before COVID. Obviously, COVID hugely increased it. So Lenore Skenazy is a woman who identified this problem. And at first, she just tried to persuade parents, let your kid out more because it's really good for their attention. Exercise is essential for attention. Children getting to play freely is essential for their attention. But Lenore quickly realized, look, just individually persuading parents on their own doesn't really work. Because if you're the only parent who sends your kid out, they get scared, you look crazy, often people call the cops. So Lenore now runs an organization called Let Grow. It's letgrow.org. What they do is they go to whole communities and whole schools and persuade everyone to give their kids increasing levels of independence that build up to letting their kids play outside, because that free play and exercise is essential for them to be able to focus. At the moment, the only place our kids get to explore anything is on video games. So I went and saw a lot of Let Grow programs. And I think of all the conversations I had for my book, probably the most moving was with a 14-year-old boy in a Let Grow program in Long Island. This was a big, strong 14-year-old boy, tall. And until this program had begun 9 months before, he had never been allowed out of his house without adults, ever. His parents wouldn't even let him go for a run round the block. And then this program began. And I said to him, what did you do? And he said, we started to play ball games in my street. And then he said, we went into the woods, and he leaned forward and he said, our cell phones didn't work. They didn't have signal, but we still went into the woods. And I said, what did you do there? And he said, we built a fort. And now we go and sit in our fort and we build other things. And as this boy talked, And this might sound over the top, it wasn't. It was like watching a child come to life, right? And Lenore was with me that day. And when he left, she said to me, think about human history. For all of human history, young people had to go out and they had to explore. They had to map the territory. They had to seek things out. And then in the space of one generation, we took all of that away. We don't give our children a childhood that our ancestors would recognize as a human childhood. And that boy, given a tiny little bit of freedom, what did he do? He went into the woods and he built a fort. This is so deep in human nature. So in the book, Stolen Focus, I talk about a lot of things I think we need to do to restore attention. I would argue every single school in Canada should have a Let Grow program. We need to restore childhood. Everyone can see, whatever you think about the COVID restrictions, and I was in favor of them, everyone can see that locking away our kids for 2 years has had a horrific effect on them, right? But that should help us to see, actually, we were locking away our kids before COVID, much more than any previous generation of human beings. We've got to now restore, if we want to restore attention, we've got to restore childhood. And I'm really, sorry.
Yeah, it's interesting because, we have some design problems, even physical design problems in suburban neighborhoods that are meant more for cars than for kids playing in the street, for instance, where woods are far and away, right? Where we have to deliver our kids to natural experiences, that kind of thing. So that it's a big problem that I just want to go back to Rebecca, and you were saying that you feel kind of overwhelmed. Can you tell me about, sort of your reflections as you hear Johann Hari's sort of thinking on this?
Yes, I am reflecting about my experience with my boys, that 2 10-year-olds now, and I as he was talking about that desire and the joy when they are allowed to explore and build forts is huge, and I think I've provided that experience with them. But as you were talking about, it's something you have to bring your children to these days. You bring them to the forest school or the nature class or something. But that has been something that has really helped and kind of been a buffer to all that's happened during the pandemic, was getting outside and finding ways to let them just explore and be children outside. It's still supervised. Yeah. It's not quite the same as it sounds like the other programs, or childhood in the 60s, 70s, and that. Yeah.
I want to bring Jamie in. Jamie is in Cambridge, and you're calling in. You're worried about your own 13-year-olds. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so this is a great conversation to kind of stumble on today. We've been really struggling with, I actually have twins. I have a boy and a girl, and my son has been very connected with his technology for the last few years. And unfortunately, due to a particular incident, we have paid a pretty, he gotten quite a bit of trouble, and we've taken everything away over the past week. And I will say, what a difference in his behavior when he has not been playing video games. He's not been talking to his friends. And I think, unfortunately, in looking at some of the things that he has been doing, just the behavior that he has online is so different than he is with us. And I don't know, we're going to have to figure out how to bring it back, because it won't be a forever. But I've just noticed such a dramatic change. And in what way? In a positive way. In a very positive way. He's much more engaged in what's happening in our family, rather than trying to remind him all the things he has to do to get ready to leave the house to go somewhere, because he's been focusing on whatever the conversation he had on Snapchat or on his Discord, or the video games he's playing. So it's just been really interesting.
He's more present.
Trying to figure out a good balance.
He's more present. So what happens?
Absolutely.
What happens on Monday?
Well, we're not sure how long this is going to be. We gave it quite a significant amount of time, I think, just in the moment. But, I'm thinking about how we start to bring that back, just in a slight way. Like, do I, look at how much time a day? I love the idea of that box. I think we're going to invest in one of those for sure.
Thank
you're
you.
so right, Jamie. And it's interesting because as you're saying that, I'm just thinking about a few things that at some level we know about ourselves as adults. So I would say, which obviously apply also to our kids, I would say to anyone listening, think about anything you've ever achieved in your life that you're proud of, whether it's starting a business, being a good parent, learning to play the guitar, whatever that thing is. It requires a huge amount of sustained focus and attention. And when your focus and attention break down, your ability to achieve your goals breaks down. Your ability to solve your problems breaks down. You become less competent. And I think one of the things you're probably seeing with your son, Jamie, is that your son is more competent when he's not being distracted all the time. And there's a reason that I learned about for this from an amazing man named Professor Earl Miller, who's one of the leading neuroscientists in the world, who I interviewed at MIT. And he said to me, look, you've got to understand one thing about the human brain more than anything else. You can only consciously think about one or two things at a time. That's it. But what's happened is we've fallen for a kind of mass delusion. The average teenager now believes they can follow 6 or 7 forms of media at the same time. It sounds like your son's in that category, Jamie. So what happens is scientists get people into labs, and not just teenagers, older people too, and they get them to think they're doing more than one thing at a time. And what they discover is always the same. You can't do more than one thing at a time. What you do is you juggle. What did mom just ask me? What was that message on Snapchat? What's this message on Facebook? What does it say on the TV about Ukraine? Wait, what did my mom just ask me? And that juggling comes with a really big cost. The technical term for it is the switch cost effect. When you try and do more than one thing at a time, you do all the things you're trying to do much less competently. You make more mistakes. You're much less creative. You remember less of what you do. And this is a really big effect. I mean, if you receive just 8 text messages an hour, it lowers your ability to pay attention to the main thing you're trying to do by 30%. And I bet your son's getting more than 8 messages an hour, right? This is why Professor Miller said to me, we are living in a perfect storm of cognitive degradation. And that's why we've got to deal with these 12 deep underlying factors that will be playing out in your life and your kids' lives. And obviously, it's why I go through what those 12 factors are and crucially the solutions to them.
Eric is in London, Ontario. We've been talking mostly about kids, but you are a professor. Tell me about your experience.
Yeah, Joanne, I'm a huge fan of your work. Stolen Focus has been a book that I've been digging into a lot lately. And there's a comment in it where you mentioned a professor who offers a podcast as an alternative to readings. And when I heard that, I had to shrink down in my chair a little bit because I do the same thing for my students. So maybe I'm perpetuating this. I'm not sure.
Because your students can't focus long enough to read books, you mean?
As an alternative to, textbook-based readings, my deal is I'm going to give you something that is similar and you can do while you're out for a walk. So hopefully that improves your headspace as well.
You were the screener says that one of the things that you have tried to do, and I teach a course at Carleton, for instance, and I've tried this same thing to try and get them to put their phones away during class. How's that going?
That was my question was, it's a great school. It's expensive. And doing the math on this, on average, they're paying double the cost of an average concert ticket to attend every single one of my classes. And so you'd think that they want to be there. They want to be engaged. They want to soak it all in. And yet every time I bring my best energy and my best content forward, I've got half the class that are still on phones or on laptops. And so I guess one way to do it is the stick, close the laptops, put away your phones. But based on what I've heard or what I've read in your book, Johann, is that maybe that's cold turkey isn't the best way to do it. So I'd love to know an alternative.
So I think there's lots of alternatives and lots of ways we can. Thank you so much for your question, Eric. And every academic I know is struggling with this. I think there's lots of things we can do. I mean, I think you should just have a rule. If you want to be in this class, you can't open your laptop. They will struggle against it and they'll be grateful for it in the longer term. But I also think we can help people to understand the bigger factors that are helping to end this. Think about something as simple as sleep. We sleep 20% less than we did a century ago. Canada, for some reason, is particularly bad on these statistics. Children sleep 85 minutes less than they did a century ago. And this is catastrophic for our attention. When you're sleeping, your brain is repairing. The whole time you're awake, your brain is building up something called metabolic waste. It's what Professor Roxanne Prichard called to me brain cell poop. And when you go to sleep, a watery fluid rinses through your brain and washes out this brain cell poop down into your liver, where it eventually exits your body. If you don't get 8 hours sleep a night, your brain is literally clogged up. You know that feeling when you haven't slept very well and you feel hungover? That's not a metaphor. Your brain is literally clogged up, right? We are not giving our brains the space to repair. This is particularly disastrous. Professor Prashad, who's at the University of Minneapolis, found that the average college student now gets as much sleep as the average active duty soldier or the average parent of a newborn baby. So they are exhausted. And anyone listening knows a night where you didn't sleep well, the next day, you're much more likely to mindlessly scroll through social media than you are to, that's not going to be the day you start reading Tolstoy, right? So helping them to learn about sleep and the methods we can use to we need to radically improve our sleep. Only 15% of us wake up feeling refreshed at the moment. Or explain to them how the way we eat is profoundly harming our ability to focus. Of the 12 causes I write about in Stolen Focus, I have to say this is the one that most surprised me and the one that I struggle with the most. I had a KFC for lunch this afternoon, which tells you everything you need to know. But there's lots of ways in which the way we eat is harming our attention, but I'll just give you an example of one. Let's imagine you grow up eating the standard American, British, Canadian breakfast. You have, buttered white toast, or you have, sugary cereal. What that does is that releases a huge amount of energy really quickly into your brain, which is great, right? Glucose floods through your brain. You're like, I'm awake, I'm ready for the day. But what happens is an hour, because that's released so much energy so fast, an hour or two later, you'll be sitting at your desk or your students will be sitting in the lecture theatre and you will experience a huge energy crash. And then you get what's called brain fog, where you just can't think clearly until you have another sugary, carby treat.
Yeah.
The way we eat at the moment, and I include myself in this by all means, is putting us on a kind of roller coaster of energy spikes and energy crashes throughout the day that causes long periods of brain fog. Whereas if, for example, if you had breakfast, if you had a porridge, which releases energy more slowly, you're not going to get those energy spikes and crashes. Now, we also have to take on the food industry. There's lots of bigger picture stuff, and there's other ways in which the way we eat are harming our attention that I go through in the book. But I think it's about explaining, the way I think about it is, if you think about this technology as like a virus, right? This technology would have at any point in human history, the way it's currently designed, had an effect on our attention. But at the moment, it's arrived in an environment where it's almost like our immune system was down. We were already doing a huge number of things that were profoundly harming our attention and focus, which of course makes us more vulnerable to that virus than invading us. We've got to deal with both. We've got to deal with the aspects of the technology that are designed to harm our attention, but we've also got to deal with the things that have made our immune system so weak that we could be invaded so easily.
It's a good segue to our next guest, who is Dr. Nathan Spring. Professor Spring is with the Department of Neurology and Neurosurgery at McGill University. He makes an appearance in your book, Johann Hari, as one of the founding pioneers in the research into something much more important than our creative thinking than you may think. It's called mind wandering, what some of us call daydreaming. In fact, mind wandering is becoming a burgeoning field of neuroscience, and we've reached Professor Spring in Montreal. Thank you so much for joining us. I know how busy you are.
Well, thanks so much for having me today.
Can you give me a description of what you were looking for in your research?
Well, what we're really looking to understand are these moments where we actually take our attention away from the immediate environment and away from technology, and we let our mind sort of open up and be free to explore our reminiscences and our plans for the future, and to really just think freely and to wander and find that reflective, creative space that opens up in our thoughts.
So Johann talks about, for instance, in his book, about how as kids we get our hands slapped for daydreaming. And so what is you finding is actually happening during those periods when our mind is wandering?
That's right. Mind wandering has this negative connotation. The child is looking outside the window in the classroom instead of paying attention and focusing and learning. But in fact, mind wandering is really one of these spaces in which we can generate creative insight. We can form, what happens is that the mind can begin to piece together these associations between memories and patterns and make these novel connections and give us insight, which is extraordinarily aspect of human creativity that allows us to have innovations moving forward. So it's this unconstrained mode of thinking that actually opens up the space for solving problems in a broader sphere.
So what we find ourselves doing, I know I do it myself, when I was writing a thesis paper, I would be I'll write this page and then I will play solitaire, give myself the ability to play solitaire for a minute and then go back to it. And instead, what you're suggesting is that I probably should have gone for a walk.
That's right. I think getting away from screens, I think, is one of the best things that we could possibly do at this moment in time to really give ourselves the capacity to just open up and let our minds fully embrace the space of and the full range, dynamic range that it can explore. When we're staying seated and focused perceptually on the immediate environments around us, we're actually inhibiting all of these associations that could be formed.
So when you're standing in line, for instance, at the checkout, and you look at other people, we are all on our phones. And what is lost?
Well, I don't think anyone really likes waiting. Waiting is a tough state of mind to be in. So I think in that case, our phones are a nice break from that negative experience. But pervasively, I think our focus on phones and this constant flow of information and capture of attention, which has certainly been commodified and used against us, is really sort of inhibiting this process of letting us more slowly reflect upon our own values and preferences and again, just forming novel associations and creative modes of thought and ways of approaching the world that might leave us in a less anxious state.
Yeah, I'm wondering if for children in particular, Johann Hari is talking about the importance of play, for instance, but I'm wondering about what happens when we are, because their time, again, in the book talks about how their time is taken up with more and more homework, more and more work to do, and as well as the technology which we take to bed with us. What do you think the long-term impact might be on children?
I think this is a really tough debate. A lot of parents have it. I have the same issues with my own kids. They're on screens a lot. And I really support the idea of, just going outside and spending some time, letting themselves get bored. But, I also think, intergenerationally, there's a lot of changes with how we've grown up with technology. And I don't want to automatically assume that it's a negative thing, that it's only going to have negative consequences for kids, because there is an incredible space within this technology where they can explore their own thoughts and ideas and express themselves. So I think we really need to figure out the right balance and not just assume that it's a negative experience, but also provide opportunities and incentives to put the screen away and spend more time sort of with free play and hopefully outdoors as well.
Professor Nathan Springs, thank you so much for joining us. I know that, Johann, you can hear each other.
He's a great person, Professor Spring. I learned a lot from him, and I'm so grateful to him for everything he said. And I think he's totally right. If we think about the benefits of technology, I'm gay, right? I think about how much easier it is for gay kids to find each other now than when I was a teenager. The really important thing, it's interesting because, and this is definitely not what Professor Spring is doing, but essentially, if you think about how the big tech want us to frame this debate, they want us to think it's a debate, are you pro-tech or anti-tech, right? And if that's the debate, we're not going to join the Amish and give up our phones, right? So you get into this kind of fatalistic, I guess I must be pro-tech. That's not the debate. The debate isn't, are you pro-tech or anti-tech? The debate is, what tech do we want, in what quantities, designed for what purposes? At the moment, we have technology that is explicitly designed to hack and invade our attention. Don't take my word for it. Sean Parker, one of the biggest investors in Facebook, said, we designed Facebook to maximally invade people's attention. We knew what we were doing and we did it anyway. God only knows what it's doing to our children's brains. They don't let their kids have any of this stuff, right? So it's about finding the right balance, but also challenging. We shouldn't allow societally big tech to be designing things that are specifically designed to hack and invade our attention, to in an extraordinarily sophisticated way find out the weakness in our attention. So I talk a lot in the book about the regulation we can introduce that would deal specifically with that, which frees up the space for the kind of things that Professor Spring has so brilliantly researched, things like mind wandering. At the moment, we're in a race. On the one hand, you've got all of these 12 factors that are invading our attention that I write about in Stolen Focus, many of which are poised to become more powerful. Paul Graham, one of the biggest investors in Silicon Valley, said if we carry on this trajectory, the world will be much more addictive in the next 40 years than it was in the last 40. Think about how much more addictive TikTok is, for example,
Yeah.
than Facebook. On the other side of the race, we've got to have a movement of all of us saying, no, you don't get to do this to us. No, you don't get to do this to our children. No, this is not a good life. We choose a life where we can think deeply, where we can focus. If we want to make that choice, I learned all over the world how we can do it. There are practical things we can do as individuals and that we can do as a society that will restore our focus. But we're going to have to fight for it, because these forces that are invading our attention aren't going to go away unless we stand up to them. So we have to make a choice to fight for this.
Nathan Sprang, I want to thank you so much for joining us. Just I only have about 30 seconds left for you, but go ahead, a last thought to you.
Well, I think it really is also about responsible consumerism, and I think we should be wary of some of these like free services that are available, because they're not really free. I mean, we're paying for it with our attention and our time. And there are really wonderful aspects of technology, but I think we're going to have to start paying for them and being responsible for some of these choices and really investing as a society in more of these tools that are allowing for better freedom of expression and creativity, as opposed to this attentional capture that Johann is speaking of.
I want to wish you the best luck in your work. Nathan Sprang is a professor with the Department of Neurology and Neurosurgery at McGill University, and we've already come to an end to our show. I have about 30 seconds left for you, Johann. Johann, go ahead.
So we've got to change our consciousness. We need to stop blaming ourselves for this problem. We are not medieval peasants begging at the court of King Zuckerberg for a few little crumbs of attention from his table. We are the free citizens of democracies, and we own our own minds, and we can take them back if we want to.
Amen. I'd like to thank our guest this hour, Johann Hari. We could have used another hour. The author of Stolen Focus, Why You Can't Pay Attention and How to Think Deeply Again. You can listen again on the CBC Listen app. It's Friday, so we take the time